Hello, welcome to Birthing the Gifts. I am clinical psychologist Dr. Kyla Holmes. Here at Birthing the Gifts, we provide a safe and compassionate space to grow your gifts. In this interview series, we discuss the process of giving birth to your God-given gifts. Today we have with us Andrea Fresh.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us today, Andrea. And so, Andrea, you have a mental health, like I say, mental health clinic, collaborative counseling associate,
Yes.
and you also have a separate initiative that you're doing, Holding Spaces. So I'm so glad you came and chatted with us today. I've been knowing you for a while when we were
Yes.
working together in the
Yes.
past, so it's just so great to see what you're doing, and just it sounds, what it looked like to me is you are really birthing your God-given gifts. That's what I said. So that's why I said I have to have Andrea on to kind of hear about your process. So part of this interview series is really, of course, about what people are doing, but it's also to highlight the process. But first, if you could tell us what you're doing. Tell us something about collaborative counseling and about Holding Spaces. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes, for having me on. And yes, it's been forever since I've seen you. So it's great reconnecting. So since we work together, I birthed the gift, collaborative counseling associates. Collaborative counseling is actually my second private practice.
Okay.
So I had another private practice where we focus primarily on kids. We had after school and summer program. And so collaborative counseling is almost completely different because my focus is primarily adults.
Okay.
And so in about 2017, so it's been about 4 years now that I established Collaborative Counseling Associates, and the name really embodies kind of what I wanted to do with counseling and mental health services. To kind of collaborate with other people to kind of help address the overall goals of mental health. And then I also provide like one-on-one individual counseling services. So some of what I've done, I work with DCFS, I do foster parent training. I've worked with other mental health agencies, like assisting them, like doing consulting work with their different projects that they do, training staff. So it's a collaborative effort, and so that's kind of the idea behind it. And at some points in my life, it's competing. So sometimes I'm doing a lot of collaborating within the community, and sometimes my clients like take over. So
Right.
so it's a labor of love on both of those efforts.
Yeah. So it's really that collaborative part. Yeah. So when you kind of had the vision for collaborative counseling, you knew it would be not just collaborating with people individually, but it sounds like also systems in the community and that kind of thing. Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
That was the goal. So.
Okay.
Yeah. And so and that's been going, and we've been building there, and then from there the birth of the other project, which is Holding Spaces from the Couch to Community.
Okay.
And so that one is a little different because it puts me in front of the camera more than what I'm used to.
Okay.
I'm used to kind of being behind the scenes working, but that's truly been a labor of love. It's a collaboration. I'm working with Resurgent TV, and so that's a Roku station.
Okay.
And it's Black owned and kind of community driven. The owner of Resurgent is Marcus Eubanks, and we had grew up together. And so we kind of reconnected, collaborated, because we were both in partnership with the Little Rock Lightning, which is a new kind of basketball team for Little Rock. So like a semi-pro team. So we were working with them. I'm collaborating with them, kind of sponsoring some things in the community, and he was working with them, kind of doing some of their production stuff.
Okay.
And so from that, we reconnected, and just thinking about and addressing some of the trauma and the things that are going on in the community, and just kind of coming together and putting our heads together to see what we could do. So that was and it happened pretty quickly, because literally I think we probably talked and conceptualized in maybe March or April of 2021, and
Oh wow.
and we began taping at the end of May 2021.
Oh, wow,
Mhm.
wow. So we moved that forward.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So collaborative counseling, you launched that private practice in 2017, and
Mhm.
then not just like about 4 years later, 2021,
Mhm.
said holding spaces.
Mhm.
If you could, so I know you connected with him in that process, but what made you feel like, what's the purpose? Maybe we can talk about that, the purpose of holding spaces. Yeah.
So some of it is, as a therapist, um, and I don't know if you've seen this too, it's sometimes in that initial session,
Mhm.
it's just the process of a person being able to release.
Mhm.
And, I've literally had clients who, just kind of report improved sense of well-being just from that process.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I can't be everybody's individual therapist,
Mhm.
even though I would like to, but time does not permit it in that way.
Mhm.
So the thought was, how can I help people for one, to normalize that experience?
Mhm.
And so that was my ideal. I want to normalize the process of what it would be like if somebody just came off the street and came and saw a therapist.
Mhm.
And so I want to normalize that process, and then I also want to provide that to
Mhm.
people in the community.
Mhm.
And so, because I know from that step, even though like people who come on the show, I'm not their therapist, but they're having a therapeutic experience,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So for them, that may be new. Some people have done therapy that come on. Some people have never done therapy before.
Mhm.
And so, for them to be able to have that experience, so that's one piece of it, is actually people in the community who want to work towards kind of, improved sense of well-being, who may say, hey, I need help, and I really know what that help is gonna look like. And so it's an opportunity for them to do that, and then afterwards, if they need resources, then I'm connecting them outside of the show. So I've had several people who have connected to other therapists to begin that process, or other resources in the community.
Right.
And then when people in the community see, they say, oh, okay. So I've had those calls too to say, such and such was on your show. I think I need to get them connected with this person or that person, because we have resources available. So that was the goal, and to see that come together in that way, that was God. That was not Andrea first. That was not me at all.
Okay, so God was working in all of that.
Yes. Because initially, my thoughts were, as we were kind of talking about and conceptualizing the project, I wanted to get another therapist in there, and I was just gonna produce. But then Marcus, who's the owner of Research, and he was like, no, it has to be you.
Oh, wow.
Oh my God. Okay. So yeah, and it all worked out in that way. So it's kind of like wanting to begin a conversation about community trauma, and also to make those connections that pretty much everybody has struggled through something at some point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So then the audience gets to connect to those stories of somebody boldly saying, hey, this is what happened to me. And I think from our season 1, our first guest and the second guest, their stories were almost mirroring each other. Yeah. So being able to show that and to tell those stories, it was beyond what I expected in the short time. And I was like, oh, I'm just gonna do this project, and it's gonna.
It's so interesting how it's like that. We think it's gonna start out one way, and just maybe we'll do. So if we can focus, I do want to go back to the specifics about the show, but if for a second, if we can kind of focus on even that process for you. It's like the process of having a vision, conceptualizing it, and then it's kind of evolving into something almost, it sounds like, even more than what you initially thought. If you could just say what that was like.
So I'll say, before I connected back with Marcus, probably at the end of 2020 or the beginning of 2021, I kind of started thinking about ways to expand counseling from the Catholic community. That wasn't what I was calling it at that time. But just kind of ways to expand that practice into be able to reach a broader audience.
Yeah.
And I think that most clinicians get to that point at some point.
Absolutely.
Right, because if the ones of us that really enjoy and connect in that way, if we could, see people 24/7, we probably would. We know that's not healthy to do. And so we're really at a cap of how many people, ethically, personally, we can see. So that's kind of at the end of 2020, and I think with everything that went on with the pandemic and just, the need was amplified, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So it's like, I wasn't necessarily in a bubble, but the people who want counseling and come, it was the ideal and the process of it was different pre-pandemic. So I never had any issues like getting clients, but it's like the influx, like the amount of people who, were, and not just like pandemic anxiety, like people who were just wanting to process out all types of things. Yeah. And so so that kind of was the call initially. And putting some thought into that, and so I originally kind of thought about doing like a podcast and things like that. And then, so with me, when I birthed a gift, it's truly a God given, because initially none of it makes sense to me. Yeah, so initially none of it makes sense at all. So I just started writing. So I'm like, okay, if God put this here, I'm just gonna write it out. I'm gonna put it on paper. Yeah. And literally, it's been things that have happened that I have just I wrote it out, put that piece of paper to the side, and never picked it up until an opportunity came. Right? So then that's what kind of happened later in the year, partnering with Little Rock Lightning. And they had like a mixer for all of their partners. And so I saw Marcus there, and I'm like, oh, okay. And so, because I didn't know what he was doing. I knew he had worked in radio and television. And so, from that, we kind of reconnected, and, oh, okay, well, that's what you're doing, and began that conversation. So when I thought about it initially and wrote it down, I really didn't think about it much anymore. Yeah,
that's amazing. But I just want to emphasize that for a second, because I'm pretty sure it's a lot of people listening who's at that stage where it's not making sense. It's not clear. You don't know. And sometimes we refer to that like the Lord really stirring stuff up. Really stirring it up and saying, hey, this is what's happening. It's not going to make sense. It's not going to be clear. But I like how you said you wrote it down.
I wrote it down.
So what was that? I guess I'm wondering the role of that. Like, do you think that was important to write it down?
So writing is part of my therapeutic process for life. So like, I was one of those kids who, for my birthday, I wanted my parents to buy me a journal. And even to this day, like my brother, he bought me a journal like a couple of years for my birthday, a couple of years ago. So, that's always been part of who I am, and I'm sure God gave me that gift because he knew I was going to need it at some point. And so, so if something is typically on my spirit for more than 24 hours, good or bad, so that's both ways. So that's kind of my process. If somebody like makes me upset, if after 24 hours I'm still kind of sitting there, that lets me know I need to address it. Okay, so that's the negative side. On the positive, if something is still kind of in my spirit after a day or so, I'm like, okay, look, I gotta write it down. Right. Yeah. Okay. So that's what happened. Like, and I started to kind of put dates on it. Just I don't know, but I'll just put the date that I'm thinking about it, because even with the first practice, which was state of the heart counseling, where I work with kids, that did not take flight. That was not birthed until 2010. But it was in 2007 that I wrote the business plan for it. Okay. And just wrote it. I wasn't there at that time. The process, I don't get frustrated. Like when God gives me an idea, or when he tells me to move, like if everything's not working in that way at that time, I just sit it down. Cause I'm like, it's in this stewing process, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so, you know, when you let things stew, then it puts the right amount of flavor in.
There you go. I love that. I love it. Yeah. So you're not frustrated by the stewing process because you know it's something happening.
Right, and typically, when I have an idea, I'm not in that space anyway. You know, so like in 2007, when I initially wrote the business plan to do an after-school program for kids and address kind of mental health and behavioral things, I wasn't in a position. I didn't even have like a business license, or you know, like I wasn't even in that position. I was totally probably working and doing something else. And so you know, God always gives us the task for today. Right? So he may give us the thought for tomorrow, but he still gives us tasks for today. So I'm always like focused on what I need to get done today, and I let him handle tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. And it sounds like you just have peace about that. That you give you a sense of peace, even though it's a process.
Yeah, I wasn't always peaceful like that, but but yeah, I've grown because he just shown me so many times that you know, if it's something that he wants to bring to light, and it may not even be through me, right? So it may be something that he kind of placed on me, and then I'm gonna have a conversation 3 years from now, and it may be for the other person.
Right.
So I've gotten to the place where I'm okay with. I'm submissive to his process. I'm not always okay. Sometimes I'm bothered.
Yeah.
But I submit to his process.
Right.
So.
Like so we can be both. We can be like, okay, they were not fully okay with it, and I can still submit to his process.
Sometimes I'm like clutching the air.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I'm still submitting to whatever he says. So.
Right. That's wonderful. So it sounds like that's what you did with this. You say it doesn't make sense right now, but I'm gonna write it down. And it sounds like then it kind of got picked back up somehow.
Yeah, like that. Now that part was new because I'm used to, you know, a year or so. Now that happened really quickly, and then that was difficult to make the adjustment to. Like I think I'm just now getting to the place where I realize, oh, okay, that was birth. Because I'm used to a longer wait time, but. Not my time.
Yeah. But that's your time. Okay.
And people think that, you know, it's more frustrating when you have to wait a long time. But when you get used to waiting a long time, it was actually, this was very difficult.
Oh, really? Because you were so used to a longer wait time, but this is like, no, it's time now.
Yes, it's time now. So I did not feel ready at all. But every time I got behind the camera and actually sat with the person that I was interviewing or talking to, that was the most natural part.
Really? Yeah. Because that flows in terms of talking and connecting.
Right. But everything else behind the scenes, I've been struggling.
Okay. So that's been something you've been having to continue to grow and develop in terms of that part of your gifting.
Because that's not a natural. It's not a natural skill set like marketing, branding, production, you know, TV, radio. Like that's not natural for me. What's natural for me is me being in the backyard playing spades. In essence, most of my, you know, therapy sessions are very relaxed. Like those are the people that God brings to me. So He brings me. He brings me who he want me to work with, clearly. So in those settings, it's a lot more natural. Like they align with kind of the skill sets that I already have. So I've been having to learn new skill sets, which is not always easy when you're sick. Like I'm used to being a therapist, and I would say that on set. I'm like, I'm just used to being a therapist. I'm not used to all this. I'm not used to the camera thing.
So you're used to the therapist side. So I do want to highlight something for those listening, this idea that, because I feel like sometimes when I talk to students or people who are interested in mental health and going down that path, they think about it in one way. So your training is in social work, is that right?
It
okay. So that was the program you went to. You have a master's in social work.
I have a undergrad degree, a BSW, a bachelor's in social work,
Okay.
and I did the master's program right out. So I did an advanced standing. It was 1 year. It almost killed me, but because it was really, really intense. But I actually, my emphasis was management and community practice. Yeah.
Okay.
So I've always kind of enjoyed the systems part of it, but my natural skill set is with the people part of it.
Yeah.
But my inner nerd, my inner blurred, I just enjoy. I enjoy the research. I enjoy the programmatic piece of it. I enjoy how things work together, and I enjoy looking at a bigger puzzle and figuring out how does it affect this one individual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, the bigger puzzle, the bigger system, community, and still goes back to the one individual.
Yes.
I think that's wonderful because I think that's important for people to know that if they're interested in social work or mental health as a career, that there are so many things that people can do with it, and you're still expanding your skill set.
I'm still
Which
learning and
is
growing.
because you want to have that impact. I'm hearing you say. I do want to go back to a term. There's a couple of things that you said that you're doing with holding spaces from the couch to the community. I just love that. So one of the things you said is normalizing therapy. If you could say a little bit about that, is what made you, like, within that context, say, hey, I know I can't, be all one-on-one, but I want to normalize what this is like.
And so when I traditionally, so it depends on where you are on the spectrum of time. So right now I'm middle aged, and I'm glad to be middle aged because we are awesome. But we all have the same type of internal struggles going on. But so a lot of my clients, particularly pre-pandemic, were like in that millennial, kind of like that younger. I saw a lot of kind of early 20s, mid 20s, early 30s, and like their enthusiasm for therapy was something that even my Gen X generation did not have.
Yep. It's different.
It's so different. It's so normal for them to seek help. And even for myself, like they even blew me out the water, because even for me, I still find myself, I'm just from that generation where we just deal with it, and so I grew up in Little Rock, in this community, in the middle, smack in the middle of the banging Little Rock days. That was my community, those were my friends, and I did not realize that those experiences and things that I saw and witnessed and losing friends so young, I didn't realize that was not normal until I got into college.
Wow.
Right? And I was like, oh, they're talking about me. So some of these courses and things that we were learning, I'm like, oh, they were talking about me. And just to think about how desensitized I have become. So if those things can happen, then it can happen in reverse. Right? And so I think that some of what maybe happened with millennials is that they are desensitized to the stigmas that are out there, where we were kind of desensitized in terms of trauma, right?
Yeah.
And so seeing that, I'm like, okay, that we need to shine a light there.
Right.
Yeah, because no, it's okay to need help. Everybody needs help. Now, how we seek help may be different, depending on what level of support you have.
Right.
So if you have a big family, a big community, a great church home, or if you have those things, then what your help may look different than somebody else who does not have that.
Right. So you wanted to normalize that, to say that it's okay
Mhm.
to reach out for that additional support,
Yes.
additional help,
Mhm.
assistance from a professional, and to actually show them. So with holding spaces, like you are literally showing people, maybe, is it kind of like what a therapy session may look like or
Mhm.
sound like?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it in my mind, what we're doing, it's not as technical. So
Okay,
like if
yeah.
it was a first session, I have paper, I'd be
Mhm,
writing, I'd be asking,
Mhm.
or I'd be kind of guiding with certain questions. So that piece isn't there, but in spirit,
Mhm. Mhm.
it's what's happening
Right.
in an initial session when
Yeah.
you just meeting a therapist, and it's the therapist's job to make you feel comfortable, right? You shouldn't sit down in front of a therapist and feel like they're the professional, they're here to tell me all about myself and my life. You should sit down and feel, and it's their job. So it's my job to make that, or to assist that person in feeling comfortable. And we know that it's like therapeutic rapport. Right? But,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's like you're showing it what that can look like. So maybe not the technical side of doing all the stuff that we have to do with the paperwork side of things with therapy, but showing them this is the feel of it. Like it's somebody that's gonna listen, maybe have that opportunity to just express in a comfortable way. Yeah, I think that's wonderful to show them what that's like. If I could go back, so that's like, I think that's wonderful to normalize that. And from what I did see, it seems like a lot of it is highlighting it in the Black community specifically. And even though I know it might not be limited to that, but I am noticing that that's a wonderful thing that you're doing.
And that's purposely.
Okay.
But the purpose of it is to normalize it first, because what I've seen is traditionally in other communities is not as taboo.
Right. Okay.
And it's not as accessible at all times in the Black community. People don't know how to access it.
Right.
There's services that exist, they don't know how to.
Yeah, so it's normalizing to show people what it looks like. It's okay. This is what it can be like. And knowing that if they want to, it's hopefully some people out there that looks like them. If they connect with, and then this is how you can access it. Oh, I think that's so wonderful. If I could, because you said something else earlier. You said all these pieces we have to touch on. You mentioned community trauma. And I just want to connect it. When I was kind of looking through what you're doing with holding spaces, I noticed in one of your kind of blurbs that I saw in the online spaces on Facebook I was looking at, and you had in there that the root of the community's problems had to do with trauma, and you mentioned community trauma. If you could just say a little bit about that, about what makes you say trauma in communities trauma.
So if we go all the way back, we have the history, and the history is not just slavery, it's not just, all the negative parts, but to think that we could endure those things and come away completely unscathed. Like, I think that expectation, particularly for the Black community, is so unfair. Like, because I'm more of like, when it comes to nature versus nurture, I'm more on the nurture side. So like if you have parents who were abused, now that does not mean that they will abuse you, but to think that the abuse that they suffer does not affect the offspring at all, right? So then we go back generations, and we're not even talking about like, what they say, 400 years. And I think even when we hear kind of the suffering that Black people had in America, we associate that with numbers. So they'll say 400 years of slavery, but some people that makes them feel like it was 400 years ago. But no, it was not 400 years ago. So, we still are talking about people who are still living now who endured some of the direct effects of, maybe have a parent or a grandparent who was still a slave. Right? So now they're somebody's grandparent or great grandparent. And so that line of trauma,
that's right.
we are not that far removed from it. And so a lot of things that we see being played out in our communities today can be trace back
Yeah.
to that line of how we feel about ourselves, about how we feel about each other.
Absolutely.
Right? So if we weren't valued, if great grandpa, and it may even not even be that many greats, was, mistreated or abused, either during slavery or during the civil rights era, and so our trauma is normalized. Like we're used to seeing each other get abused. We're used to seeing each other, shot and killed. And then even going back to my generation in the 90s, I got used to having friends who were just shot and killed. And
community violence.
Yeah, and it was just like, okay, well, R.I.P. At some point, right? Not the first initial time, but over time, that's just kind of how disconnected you can get.
Wow.
And so now when we look at the things that are going on in the generation now, that they are almost completely disconnected from, first of all, their own actions and how it's continuing to inflict trauma on their community and themselves. And so that's kind of the idea of that community trauma and showing how it plays all the way out. And like for season 1, our last guest, Miss Lisa Hicks Gilbert, she's a descendant of the Atlanta massacres. And so having her come on and kind of talk about her grandmother, who was still living during that time, and the trauma that it still has in that community in Atlanta, Arkansas. And she just recently moved back to kind of help to,
Oh wow, yeah, we're gonna have to check that out just because it's community trauma, is racial trauma, is cultural kind of, shared traumas that we've had, generational trauma. So you're highlighting those kinds of things in people's lives and then how it goes back still to the individual person.
Yeah.
If people wanna just because I've been able to watch a couple, but I now have to go back and watch that one you said about definitely Elaine, Arkansas, because there's people here in Arkansas might not even know about that in general.
Well, she was born and raised in Elaine and didn't know about the Elaine massacre.
Oh wow! So even people
because the community, the older people there, they were told to never talk about it again, so they never talked about it again.
So it wasn't even talked about. Oh man. So if people want to go and not only watch that episode, but want to see the other episodes, how can people find out about what you're doing with Holding Spaces and what's coming next?
Yes, so we are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, we have a YouTube channel. So not all the episodes are loaded to YouTube, but they will be at some point. And that's Holding Spaces LR, right? Also, if someone wants to come on season 2, because we'll begin shooting for season 2 soon, they can email me at holdingspacesLR@gmail.com. Also, Resurgent TV, so www.resurgenttv.com. All of the episodes are there, so all 10 of them. It's a free Roku station. If you don't have a Roku TV or can't get a Roku channel, you can watch it online, www.resurgenttv.com.
Okay, so they can go and watch all the episodes there. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Holding Spaces, HOLDING Spaces LR, and they can find you in those spaces there. Okay. Thank you so much. I just appreciate you coming on, talking about collaborative counseling, so they can also maybe find you there.
Yes. So I'm on Facebook as well. Collab, COLLAB, counseling, COUNSELING.
There you go.
I know that's long, but they can find me there as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to hear about what you're doing, and I look forward to seeing what you continue to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and again, this has been another episode of It's a Process conversation series by Birthing the Gifts. Thank you so much for joining us today.